Good morning, everyone. This is a meeting of the Elected Official Compensation Commission. I'm Michael Kassler, the chair of the commission. We'll just go around the table and let everybody introduce themselves, please, and who you represent.
Darlene Wilds, Deputy City Auditor.
Megan Kilgore, City Auditor.
Maria Walters, Public City Council.
Greg Beaverson, Compensation Manager, Department of Human Resources.
Fred Rancier, Commissioner.
Keisha Hunley Jenkins, Commissioner, Equity Now Coalition, and the Boys and Young Men Code Collective.
Robert Tobias, City Attorney's Office.
Shelley Bidey, Mayor's Office.
Richard Blunt, Mayor's Office.
Sarah Ingalls, Commissioner.
Okay, welcome all. We have to add to the agenda, with your permission. Naya is going to give us a presentation on council member duties that she's conducted a survey with. So we'll include that in the agenda. Have you had an opportunity, commissioners, to review the meeting minutes?
Yes.
I would just make a comment on the at the bottom of that first page. What is the problem that commission wants to solve, and then part-time versus full-time? While I think we've had, and maybe this is indistinguishable, but while I think we've had a conversation, certainly spent a lot of time talking about part-time versus full-time. That really is not our charge. Our charge is to come up with a compensation level for all the elected officials. And while that issue may affect our recommendation, it's really not our duty to determine whether council members are full-time or part-time. Is there any other comments on the minutes? If not, can I have a motion to approve the minutes, please?
I'll make a motion.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. The first item on the agenda is a presentation on projections and trends in revenues by Auditor Kilgore and Ms. Wiles.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Megan Kilgore. Darlene and I are going to tag team through this presentation. But first of all, thank you for your service. I really do appreciate it. I know it's an investment of your time, but I appreciate also seeing some faces very familiar to the city coming in this capacity to serve. So thank you. What we were going to talk about today, and who has control of the screen? Lovely. I'll tell you when to switch. You each have copies as well, which will probably be easier to see. The charge was to talk about the revenue and revenue projections. I think most of you are familiar with the Office of the Auditor, but as just kind of a general recap, our office oversees largely the revenue side of the city of Columbus. The mayor and city council, of course, are on the expenditure side. In most, form and fashion, we collect revenues. We make sure that all the accounting and operations behind every dollar that comes and goes in city government goes into the right place. We do the financial reporting. We certainly do a lot with what we call our investor outreach. We sell our bonds to finance our big capital projects. That goes to international investors. So a lot of what we do is communicating the city's financial strength, the city's ability to plan for and finance its capital projects, and work with our credit rating agencies. As you all know, I believe, we are one of the largest cities in America to maintain a AAA credit rating from each of the 3 credit rating agencies. That is called a AAA. It's the highest available. We have a lot of pride in that, and one of the good outcomes is that we're able to do a lot more projects because the cost of those projects is less by maintaining that AAA rating. So the purpose of today is really to talk about the revenue projections, what we see forthcoming, And I'll tell you, as many of you know, my predecessor was here for almost 50 years of elected service. We thought he had seen everything. He had not seen a pandemic. And it's really important to acknowledge, because in times like these where we have unprecedented levels of wage inflation, wage growth, we also have unprecedented levels of federal money impacting just about every facet of the economy. We also have a third piece, which is we have to try and anticipate and estimate remote work. And we all know in this room the trends that we're doing today as individuals are very different than what they were a year ago and very different than 2 years ago. Why it's so important to the revenue estimate is that, as you know, in Ohio, you pay taxes and income taxes where you work. And so every single day as people make decisions about how they're working, that will impact the city of Columbus's ability to collect those taxes. So some of you may, in your own offices, have employees who are now working remotely out of Dublin or Powell. You also may have some people who were working in those cities and now living and working in Columbus. All of that carries consequences to the city of Columbus. So that kind of preamble is really important because these are unprecedented times. Like we said, Mr. Dorian, we thought had seen just about everything, but this is, I feel like in many ways we've advanced ourselves maybe 7 to 10 years with this idea of remote work. So let's dig in a little bit, and Darlene and I will tag team, but please interrupt with questions because this is happy to discuss. Go to the next slide, if you don't mind, the next one after that. As I mentioned, one of the core duties of our office is to try and predict what the revenues will be for the city's general fund. That is going to set the ceiling, that does set the ceiling. This is a charter-imposed duty on my office. It sets the ceiling for the mayor's budget. And so we spent countless models, frankly, countless hours working our way through revenue analytics, trying to predict how remote work was going to impact the city and its tax collections. So the revenue estimate for 2022, and frankly, the estimates for the next probably 3, 4, 5 years, will all have significant considerations of remote work, ongoing pandemic recovery, which, as we know, will affect the labor force for years to come. We still have a very good outcome in Columbus, which is economic growth. We are realizing great economic growth. As the large projects come into the city too, we will benefit from that agglomeration where service providers are coming in to support those businesses and their ecosystems. But we also have to contend with a lot of variables that we don't know. In addition to remote work, we do not know how many folks may, in fact, next year file for refunds because they have, in fact, been working elsewhere and they were not being withheld that way correctly throughout the year. So there are a significant number of variables that we have to unpack. If we go to the next slide, I wanted to do a recap of how the city is structured from a revenue perspective. And some of you, having served with Columbus in prior years, you'll remember maybe when the city was less reliant upon income tax. In the last 20, 25 years, our reliance has really shifted. We are now, as you'll see on the top right of the page, about 78%, 79% reliant on income tax to fund our general fund. Every other revenue is pretty de minimis. Property tax has grew in its use because as valuation in the last few years has really grown. So it went from about 5% of our revenues to now 7.5%. But the reason why I remind you of this is because this is why we spend so much time studying the income tax, i.e. the wage side of things. You'll see some ongoing trends. We do, for example, in future years anticipate as the Fed raises rates, investment earnings will grow with that. We're still in a period of, I think, it's not very normal. And that goes for both things like, the fine side of things, some of the other, possibly shared revenue, and then also, investment earnings. As we normalize, those items will shift. Darlene, anything else you'd add on this page?
Yeah, I think it's important to point out the transfers that we're transferring into the general operating fund this year.
Good point.
We're transferring about 50 million of that 61 million is from something that we call the Basic City Services Fund, which is the finance had set aside money that we got from the Bureau of Workers' Comp as a rebate on our BWC premiums in 2020. The governor had ordered that BWC look at their balances and send us back what they could. And we actually, overall, the city got about $100 million that was allocated among funds. So about 50 million of that going into the general fund this year is that BWC rebate that we had transferred to another fund.
It's a very good point. If you go to the next page, I wanted to show kind of historically how income tax has trended. Yes, Fred?
That's a one-time.
One time.
Okay. So as I look at this, the total of revenue and transfers, I suppose is, without that, is considerably lower, given the 2 years prior. But these are all pandemic years, correct? 2021 and 22?
That's correct.
If I went a pre-pandemic year, would it look like the $3,000 to $7,000 range?
For the transfers in,
Yeah, it'd probably be about, $4 to $5 million. Usually what that number is, it represents transfer in to cover some of our economic development agreements. Because we split our general fund money, 75, 25, 25 going to a debt service fund. When we do an economic development agreement, we take that 25% out. And, yeah,
That's the transfer.
that's
Okay.
usually what the transfer is for the most part.
Mr. Renzier, I think that's a good point, though, because of the anticipated impacts of remote work, we did anticipate a shift of our tax revenues to the bedroom communities where people are now physically working. As such, the use of those one-time revenues was used in order to balance the budget this year.
Yeah, because if you look at that top line, you'll see that we have significantly decreased that income tax revenue, and I think we're going to get into that a little more.
Yeah, so the next page is,
Just one other
please.
comment. I want to say, some time ago, that income tax was representing more like 2/3 of the general fund rather than 3/4, right? And that's because of loss of state and local government fund and other,
Correct.
Yeah, there are three things: the estate taxes, tangible personal property was shifted, the state reduced during the Kasich administration, some of the local government funds going down to the cities, and then, as you know, the city of Columbus then had to make a very hard decision. We asked our voters to approve a 0.5% tax increase in 2009. And that is what made them growth from 60%, 66% thereabouts to 78%. Historically, income tax in the city of Columbus, we're the second city, believe it or not, in the nation, next to Toledo, to institute a tax increase. We've only had a handful of years where the taxes were less than. We experienced negative growth, so we had a reduction year over year. And those years, surprisingly, 02, I believe 03, and I think 08. But point is that we've now had 4 years in the 2000s. Otherwise, we've had a pretty sizable history of stability. We would average, with our population growth, more people, more tax revenue, more jobs. That's usually kind of our formula. Typical growth would be between 3-4%, sometimes 5%. We like to see a little bit that upper side because we do have more people to serve as a result of our population growth. But looking at 10 years of history here, you'll see steady growth between 13. 18 was a little bit of a tougher year. I'm sure your personal, you saw that in other capacities too, a little bit of retrenchment here, but still good. 2019 was a spectacular year in Columbus, an expansion year. The highest year of our balances, income tax was doing very well. And so in other words, we entered the pandemic on spectacular footing. We could not have, as a city, been more fortunate to have entered that 2020 period than how we did. Our balances are what we had banked in our rainy day fund and so forth. We're really in good shape. So when 2020 hit, as you know, we experienced through the shutdown a severe decline of about $41.5 million, and then a pretty sizable, not rapid, but sizable movement upward as an incline as businesses reopened, pivoted, figured out how to work differently, i.e. from home. And that's the nature of having a very office-friendly, healthcare-friendly, education, community that we have here in Columbus. So the way that our economics look in that year, very much like a Nike swoosh. Quick down, wrap it up. With that, though, we had a very quick response from our team in finance and management to make the decisions necessary to move the city forward, to navigate those treacherous waters. And I'm very pleased to say not only were we able to do so without cuts to services, but without any impacts to our employees. No furloughs, no layoffs, and that is a testament to the city's adherence to our fiscal foundation. I take a lot of pride in those fiscal policies, and we're one of the strongest situated in the country for that. Could not speak more about that, yeah.
By the growth of our dependence on the income tax?
That's a great question, and there have been some articles in Brookings Institution, McKinsey, and some others who have talked about the vulnerability of places like Columbus due to having such an elastic tax. In theory, when you are unable to work shutdowns, we would be the most vulnerable. What those studies failed to do, those initial studies, is look at the composition of our employers. Our employers, especially at the large offices, the corporations, they started working differently. Were the individuals, small businesses still impacted? Absolutely. But our bread and butter is not built on, for example, tourism taxes or consumption taxes that were significantly altered. Instead, they're wage taxes. And as people figured out how to work differently, we saw that rebound. It's a really good question. The strength of our financial management really lies in our ability to maintain some flexibility. We can withstand some occasional bumps because of that adherence. And we have really good, I think, cooperation with the entire team in finance and management through that. So as we got through 2020, what we did not anticipate was the levels of federal stimulus. That stimulus continues to permeate our local economy. I could go into sizable detail. There's no need to, but just simply say that between wage inflation that was necessary for some people to get employees in the door because of inflation that occurred, wage growth that occurred out of businesses being very successful, bonuses giving out, and so forth, we experienced significantly increased wages pretty much across the board. And I'll show that to you on the next slide. Actually, go one more slide and I'll go back to this one if you don't mind. It's going to be easier to see. Yeah, this is the sheet that I'm pointing to right now. Has a chart, a little bit of color. One more past that, Keisha. Yep. This is a question we get asked all the time. How can we still be in a compressed labor environment and still yet be benefiting from pretty high levels of revenues? And again, it goes back to that Bermuda Triangle, where we are still experiencing wage growth, still huge levels of federal stimulus and support, and also what is the on-ramp of remote work. On the left-hand side, and this kind of gets back, I think, maybe, Chair, to where your question was going. On the left-hand side, you'll see at the end of 2019, there were 579,824 jobs filled in Columbus. In 2020, we dropped to 553. In 2021, we just rebounded to 565. So we're still down 14,000 jobs, roughly, from 2019. Yet we're still seeing wages and revenues here at the city right now that are significantly not in what you would think lockstep with this. And that is because of wage growth and ongoing stimulus. Yes?
So I know that you mentioned that we have been, like, the stimulus payments are still kind of invigorating into our economy. And how does that work when we're looking at, like, the amount of people that are, that were on unemployment and some that have remained on unemployment and have not went back to work because they were making more on unemployment than they were able to make at some of their jobs? So how does all of that kind of interface into this day that you're speaking about?
Sure. Looking at the types of jobs that have been growing. In 2020, I would say, and you chime in too, whenever you have some thoughts. In 2020, it was a year of stabilization where the employers that I just mentioned to Mr. Renzier came out very solidly for us. Those were the major financial institutions, insurance companies, and certainly government, and our more stable employers in healthcare. What changed in 2021 is that there was expansion. There was huge amounts of capital accessed, and new jobs were being built left and right. Ecosystems of healthcare, of technology, and of what I'll call categorically like financial and insurance tech, those ecosystems are creating offshoots of all kinds of really highly paid jobs. And so things like 3D printing for healthcare, biomedical engineering, things that are really creating highly skilled, highly paid jobs in this sphere. Drive Capital alone, a venture capital firm who is funding a lot of these ideas, created roughly 3,000 jobs. So to answer your question really directly, we have more highly paid jobs, and it does mask the fact that we have lost a lot of jobs at those lower paid levels. A very simple way of putting it is for every 3 jobs that we lost at the under $50,000 mark are being masked by the fact that 1 new job has come on board that pays $150,000 a year. So that's why we look at job numbers in terms of filled jobs, in addition to looking at the types of jobs.
Thank you.
I'll get more into kind of the forecasting because we know around this table, and this is really where I'm 100% focused. Through PPP, it was making sure the PPP went to the targeted households that were really important. This right now for me is about making sure that we're creating as much labor participation as possible for those individuals who remain perpetually unemployed or underemployed. As we are able to find those successes, maybe the stimulus or other ancillary support systems change or they reduce in funding, we do anticipate that labor force will grow. We do anticipate that those jobs will be filled. So the good news is for Columbus, we have a lot of people who can still go into that work. We have a lot of jobs that are still growing, and we're going to be able to benefit from that. The quandary for us right now is, what is the impact of remote work? It's 2 very different topics of our local economy versus the city's revenue base, which is not the same that it was, 3 years ago. So if you go back to the prior page, what I want to show you, because none of us in this room will probably, if we all make guesses, be accurate as to where we think remote work will go. We're changing our behaviors every single day. So we find comfort in this office in working in ranges, small, medium, and large t-shirt sizes, if you will. For example, McKinsey had a spectacular survey where they anticipated how much work could be done remotely without losing productivity. We also have surveys that will be done, or have been done, that estimate how much remote work is being done today. So those small, medium, and large t-shirt sizes are really important for us because of the materiality of income tax. Low levels of remote work right now will impact us in 2022 by about, we predict, $44 million. That money being shifted to the suburbs. If we have another significant variant, if our businesses commit to longer-term remote work, that could increase it to medium or high being a shift of about $117 million. These are big numbers, but when you're 80% of your revenues come from it, we know it to be true. So I think another kind of point on this is that the best thing that we can do as the office, we're not alone, and every city in the state of Ohio is contending with this right now, is to share this information as openly and transparently as behaviors change. But I cannot tell you, what I heard in one of the videos I watched was trying to estimate what our revenues will be in 10 years or 5 years. It is impossible to anticipate behaviorally what people will be doing and how they will be working. Instead, what I wanted to do is really talk to you for just a moment about the complexity of the city, because those are things that I know for certain to be true. So if you don't mind, please, Fred.
When I go back to the page that showed this one,
Yes.
that kind of illustrates the revenue sources.
Yes, sir.
And you comment that, certainly 3/4 of it starts with income tax. Are there any opportunities below or is there discussion, I guess it would be a council question, really. Are there discussions about opportunities to kind of shift some of this revenue burden?
Not to my knowledge. When you think about what else could we, charge, during a pandemic, I'm not sure that's a great
Tax is
conversation.
something that, it's a number that can be worked with, but,
Yeah.
I just look at this, of course, licenses and permits, they're
Sure.
either temporary or, it could be temporary, could be permanent, but we're going in the wrong direction, it sounds like, and it's making us, it's going to make our job certainly more complicated, because we're projecting out to 2026. That's one thing. There's a great unknown that could be very positive or negative. That's Intel. Very
Sure.
positive regionally, but if everybody's working and living in Licking County, it is going to be burden on the city, clearly, with the additional population, but the revenues will be going other places. So regional, another opportunity, regional, economic development.
I'll
Kind of
respond.
covers some of this because,
Yeah. Two things come to mind. First of all, anytime you have regional growth, and I've been really interested in studying, this is an anecdote really to this conversation, what's happened in Austin or Seattle or Nashville even. Good news is we have a good data. Regionally, the city of Columbus will benefit from that type of growth in those jobs because of places that we're already seeing anticipated investment. Because of the number of additional service providers that'll be necessary, they are moving in. I'm talking to the developers at Easton. They're seeing it. The Innovation District at Ohio State, the airport, Rickenbacker. These are all places that will benefit. Much larger conversation about the economics of, let's say, the equality of like school funding and so forth. Not for this particular discussion, but what I am excited about is, though very sincerely, Mr. Vanzier, we will have additional job growth that is in Columbus as a result of that. I have no doubt about that at all. We also, because of our adherence to healthcare and other jobs that largely do function here, we know that our economy will be continuing to grow. And I feel really comfortable as auditors saying that we will benefit as a tax base here in Columbus because those businesses are here. I'm very comfortable with that right now. Please, one more thing I want to add before I forget is the Economic Advisory Committee, you'll remember, was convened in 2008-09. During that time, these excellent people looked at a variety of different revenue sources, evaluated other types of fees and so forth. That is something that the city could look at in the future, but I'm not aware of it being done right this second.
I was just going to say, it's never before have I heard a president in a State of the Union message refer to Columbus, but President Biden did do that last night as it relates to Intel.
If you don't mind going to the slide called February 22 Revenue Update. I shared with you the job numbers first because it's easier to express to you what's happening. with certainly the higher paying jobs and ongoing federal stimulus. We also, and perhaps some of you may know friends, family members who benefited from bonuses that were paid out this past January. So I wanted to give you some lead in before showing you this data. This is our just hot off the press from February numbers. If you note in the income tax category, the end of February over February of 2021, we are up about 9%. If you had told me, predicted that would have happened, let's say at the beginning of 2020, I would have said no. I wouldn't have gone for it at all. These are very, very unusual times. But if Darlene and I spent a lot of time yesterday looking at the top 100 largest employers, and you can definitely see some anomalies, most likely some sizable payments for bonuses attributable to 2021, but we're also seeing new businesses who are working in Columbus. We benefit, it's inflows and outflows, right? With remote work, we do have those jobs flowing to the suburbs. We do have those tax revenues, but we also have people staying in the short north, staying in the King Lincoln district where they're working from home. That's what we're going to continue to monitor and see as we figure out what our next year of new normal is. What else would you share on this slide? There's some big variances. You want to speak to any of those?
Yeah, property taxes is just a timing issue. We get advances in January and February on our settlement, which happens in March or April. So that's just a timing difference. Also a timing difference in the shared revenue. That has to do with casino revenue is in that line item, and we were delayed in getting our casino money last year, so that's just a timing issue. And then, of course, you'll see that big transfer in, $51 million. So that makes a huge difference to the bottom line.
So in typical times, it would be safe for us to state that with population growth as it is expected, we would be averaging 3 to 5% kind of growth in revenues. Given that these are also years of expansion in jobs, especially highly paying jobs, I would be more comfortable around the 4 to 5% given typical years. Just because of remote work, I'm really hesitant to say this is what I think things are going to be. But I do know that we're continuing to grow, and we're continuing to grow with people and with jobs. I did want to go into that just a little bit. I suspect, Chair, this is information that you already have. But as you see, Columbus continues to build up speed with respect to its growth. This is a chart courtesy of the United Way. Columbus exceeds our first decade in the 2000s, and we're going to continue growing. That we do know. If you go to the next page, just as a reminder, we were one of only 14 cities in the entire country to grow by more than 100,000 persons between 2010 and 2020. If you note, not Nashville, not Chicago, but Columbus. And also, I think really important to unpack is that 5 of those cities who grew by more than 100,000, they were in Texas. So if we truly look at our peer cities of growth, i.e. complexity, we really do need to look at just a few across the country. I wanted to respond with, if you go to the next page, really our more people requires more infrastructure. And in Chair, I really wanted to speak to the fact that our growth and the complexity of trying to manage, the city of Columbus, I correlate to a Fortune 1000, given the size of our revenue streams and so forth. But we continue to build. We continue to anticipate that growth. And we continue to have to contend with the complexity of the different types of growth. The next 2 pages are...
Non-enterprise infrastructure.
Oh, that's a good question. Thank you. Non-enterprise would be items, sir, like recreation and parks,
Okay.
streets, sidewalks, pretty much everything that's not utility broadly. Transportation would be the critical one of that, Mr. Renzier. The next 2 pages, this is taken from last year's financial audit for the city. But this is the city's net position. This would give you the best bird's eye view. I really was trying to think about how to give you something to plan for what we expect for the next 10 years. And it was, for me, really showing the growth, business type activities, fancy way of saying utilities largely, and the parking garages, water, sewer, storm sewer, electricity, parking garages. Primary government would be things like public service, safety, rec and parks. But you'll note in just 10 years' time, this is the growth. This is the additional level of things like expenses. Even if there are more revenues, it does not necessarily mean that there's more complexity. But when you look at more people, especially the diversity of this beautiful population that we have coming in, we have over 100 some languages spoken in Columbus City schools alone, as Keisha knows so well. This is where I think the role of government is going to continue to grow in its complexity. I'll leave this with you to study. But that really, I think, sums up the presentation that I wanted to offer. Darlene, is there anything that I missed that you wanted to definitely speak to?
I don't think so. I mean, if we need to get more into the remote work conversation, we can certainly do that if there are questions about that.
Yeah, one of the things Greg's obviously been working on is securing comparable cities of what's the term?
Comparable cities.
Comparable cities, yes. Do you see trends from cities like Cleveland or Cincinnati? I think of those first because they're the 2 next largest in terms of their growth or revenue projections that would be different than what we are seeing here in Columbus, and if so, how? And obviously, we're going to have to come up with some forecast, I guess, of what revenues are going to look like, and if we're going to, I think we need to certainly look at the 2 other large cities in Ohio, because under some structures, they are looking for state and federal revenues similar to our income, but then there's the growth factors and other things that I see here that may or may not. But I just wondered whether there's something that kind of puts these other cities side by side.
Sure. No, that's a great question. I will tell you, in none of my personal projections on either the capital side or on the revenue side do I look really at either of those 2 cities because of a couple of things. One, our composition of employers so different. The composition of our growth as well with labor is very, very different. You know, it's a beautiful thing. You're wearing an Ohio State, emblem on your shirt today to see the outpouring of talent that we have here. We don't have to give away suitcases right now to get people to come to Columbus. They are coming. And our challenges with that growth are sizable, affordability being a key part. But I also look at just simply the complexity of management of those municipalities. Don't give me a little leeway here, but I'm going to guess maybe 70 to 80, 90 at most square miles for those 2 cities. We're 228. So when you think about us, from a size perspective, the closest city to us size-wise in America is Chicago. We just have maybe 1/5 of its population right now, but we're growing. So we have a lot of land to cover, public safety, streets, rec and parks, everything, that complexity, but building into that density, building it thoughtfully, that is a huge, huge, huge both opportunity and challenge. Revenue-wise, we are all kind of similar in Ohio because of that adherence to income tax. But what's different is, frankly, the size and, again, the number of employers, the numbers of different types of jobs, the fact that we have a lot of internationality here with Rickenbacker and our other growth and so forth. I would look, if I'm looking for comps, I would look at some of the cities included on the page that I shared with you regarding the U.S. Census. There are only 14 that grew by more than 100,000 persons. And I would certainly look at the Charlottes, the Nashvilles, the Austins, but I would also consider global, to be quite honest, because those are the conversations. When I'm talking to investors on Wall Street, we're no longer competing inside the state, we're competing globally, which is a really great thing to do.
Another, I don't know if these numbers still hold up, but some time ago, the population of Columbus and Boston were the same, but Boston's population was within 15 square miles, and ours is within 225. So that creates,
And I think Boston, they oversee the school district as well, don't they?
I don't know about that.
I think, I could be wrong there.
I look at our country. If you look at the East Coast, you're thinking Europe. You go West Coast, I guess America, I don't know. Very different. So the East Coast, you have the people living close and high, and, you know, Columbus is kind of slotted somewhere in between those dynamics. We have a growing inner city, but we're basically a suburban, have been a suburban community. That's, so it's you know, there's, when you said, you know, the international markets also play roles in how we project in Columbus. You know, I kind of see something different in Boston than you know, there's, it's quite interesting. I mean, there are no planes in Europe, right?
That's,
You
yeah.
know, there's no
Things like
Montanas.
Innovation District will elevate us, but as we as a city and a community contend with regional transportation, objectives that are trying to grow our city and our community and our region thoughtfully, that will also be immense challenges. We're really fortunate to, I think, very much have an agile, you know, government, as you know very well from having served, and that will, you know, certainly benefit us well as we make these really, really big decisions.
Are there any other questions or comments for the auditor?
Thank you both. And I just had a quick question. Do you have, could you share with us a list of the benchmark international cities?
Be happy to.
If no other questions or comments from you, we thank you, Auditor Kilgore, and we appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Any further questions you think of, just please reach out to me directly or Darlene. We'd be happy to talk to you about remote work for about 14 days if you'd like.
Okay, next we have on our agenda a presentation from Greg Beaverson on survey updates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. What we have here, I wanted to, well, we'll just start at the beginning. 24 cities we are surveying. 13 have responded to the survey. I do want to give a little more good news this morning. I have, I don't know if you want to call them guarantees or I'm not sure. Promises, I don't know what, from Charlotte and Baltimore. And on Auditor Kilgore's slide, I saw that Charlotte was one of those cities, additional cities with 100,000 population growth. I also noticed that Nashville, or not Nashville, Austin was there. We have Austin. Denver was there. We have Denver's data. And I believe there's another one I'm forgetting. With those two cities, that will bring the survey respondents to 15. I looked in 2018, for the 2018 commission, there were 16 survey respondents. So we're actually pretty close there. I'm sure what everyone is noticing, though, is that we still do not have data for Cincinnati and Cleveland. And that is something I've been on top of as much as I can. You can only make so many phone calls and send so many email messages. My last communication with both cities was on Friday. So I will be trying that again as soon as I can.
Wonder if they're waiting for us.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm also trying some other methods to obtain the information. Next page, Table 1. Table 1 shows the population of the municipalities studied. Again, all of these slides that I'll show you refer to, obviously, cities who returned data. And this is pretty consistent with the rest of the slide presentation. I'm not sure if commissioners were able to review the slides ahead of time, but this is pretty consistent. We'll highlight Columbus and then put the data label there. Page 4, slide 2. Some cities have city managers also. So this particular slide shows the mayor and city manager salaries. This is sorted by the mayor's salary, however. So highest to lowest, and then the dark blue lines are city managers. And just like with Auditor Kilgore's presentation, please feel free to stop me if you have any questions as we go. Yes?
So my question is, for the municipalities that have city managers that make, it seems like they tend to make more than the mayors in most cases. Is that usually when they have like a weak mayor system? Like, kind of, what kind of guides or dictates that rate of pay?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something that we can do in terms of the data. We can overlay that information in terms of what type of city government that those have. With this basic information, I don't have that there, but I know that the commissioners have that raw data. In other words, the actual survey responses that we received. So we could check into that and see, and maybe create a couple of charts that overlay that information. I know that's not a very good answer right now, but that's something we could produce.
A lot of these cities, I believe, that have city managers, they have mayors that are sometimes presidents of city council that act in a ceremonial capacity.
In some cases. And some of the cities are pretty good about explaining that relationship, or we've also asked them to supply, if necessary, a link to their charter or something that describes how the makeup of their city government is. Most cities are pretty good at providing that.
Looks like those cities that have both mayors and, I'm looking specifically at Memphis and Lexington, they're spending a huge amount at the executive levels as compared to the mayor systems. Just
It is interesting. The observations when comparing and contrasting the two are sizable sometimes. Table 3, page 5, is just the mayors. So this is the same data that you saw in the previous chart without the city managers included.
So what, the median mayor cell, okay. So the median on the combined is mayors and city managers.
No, Commissioner, that is the mayor for, and I'm sorry, I should have brought that up before when we were looking at Table 2. The median line displays mayor's salaries only.
Okay.
Now, of course, I can produce that
No,
data combining
I just wanted
both.
to
Yeah.
make sure I'm apples to apples.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, that median line represents just the mayor's salary. And then on Table 3, page 5, mayor's salary, of course. Page 6, Table 4. Well, my apologies there. The median salary got left off. Looks like it's about, if you'll allow me to estimate, it looks like about 175,000. In producing these slides, that one little box gives me trouble. That gives me the most trouble in copying from an Excel spreadsheet over to the PowerPoint. So I'll make sure that that's put back on there.
We don't have, well, maybe we do, the population data?
We do, yes.
Okay, I mean, as I'm looking at the salaries, what's the size of the population being served?
We can produce data. I can produce charts that will be, for example, per capita, salary per capita. In fact, I recall back in 2018, Commissioner, when you were the chairperson, you specifically requested that information. So we could produce that. That wouldn't be a problem.
Should I get the per capita? And I was like, well, I'll just wait and let them ask if they want.
Sure,
that.
sure, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll produce these same slides with the per capita information in there.
Do we have any insight onto why city managers make so much more than the mayors, except for in Memphis and Lexington? I mean, I know you said it depends on duties, but in some cases, it looks like almost 3 or 4 times as much.
Yes, Commissioner, I would, in my experience in understanding different forms of city government, it really is, as Chairman Castler was saying earlier, is that sometimes in some cities, that mayor role is more of a ceremonial type role. The city manager, in some cases, is more like, they treat them more like the CEO of a corporation. And I think what they're doing is providing those higher salaries in order to attract similar types of people who would go for a job like that. That's my understanding. Certainly not a full answer, I realize that, but from reviewing different types of governments over the years and seeing differences, comparing and contrasting, that's been my observation, just on a surface level.
And I think city managers' positions, they can move around. Mayors of cities don't, but city managers can, be in Cincinnati one year and Dayton the next. It's competitive, and that, I presume, is what the salary levels are responding to.
And anybody can run for mayor, right? But everybody's not qualified to be, it's a professional level
Okay.
of expertise versus,
Usually an
Political.
appointed position, not elected.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner, you're welcome. Let's see, we were on city attorney page 7. The city auditor, table 5. Median salary 153,447. Sorry, I should have been reading these median salaries the whole time. Page 7.
okay, oh, auditor, okay, I got it.
So Darlene, do you have any comments for us on this whole issue of city auditor versus controller and the various different responsibilities that various cities may have?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one thing that a controller might not do that, Megan has to do with issuing bonds and being, on point with the bond market. And, we do have a very large bond portfolio. That's one key item that I would differentiate from a controller.
Okay.
Controllers elected officials, or are they appointed?
I would imagine they're hired, they're
It
appointed.
depends. It depends. In the survey responses, usually there's some kind of notation if they're not. Actually, we've asked them to provide us that information on every elected official if, for whatever reason, the city auditor or controller is not elected. Please note that.
I want to say, I looked at the report from 2018, and so one of the things they talked about as relates to Auditor Kilgore, or just auditors in general, is that our auditor acts more like a CFO of the city versus other auditors. Their duties they have fewer duties, and so that is why her pay is at the level that it is more commensurate with a CFO versus someone that does the individual comptroller auditor functions, because those are technically two separate functions, and some cities have the opportunity to have both. And so I think that was some of the conversation that came up in the last commission, because I remember reading that in one of their reports or hearings. So I just wanted to add that additional piece.
I also recall in the 2015 commission, the first, sometimes it's just a matter of terminology. In a city charter somewhere else, the city auditor is called the city controller. Not always, but sometimes.
Okay.
On page 8, table 6 shows council member base salary. Median salary for the respondent cities, $61,609. Page,
Greg?
yes, yes, sir.
Just another point of information, if you might. So, the last commission was dealing with a catch-up. Was that a regional catch-up or a national catch-up? We went in knowing that we had to catch up. I think that was, I don't know if that was conveyed to us or it came out of data. Do you recall?
I'm sorry, I don't recall.
Was there anything in minutes?
I know that,
I watched the hearings, and I think from what I gathered is that you all looked at all of the other cities, and based on what similar situated cities were paying their council members, you all determined that but there was a catch-up that was needed to kind of make sure that we were paying our council members kind of on the same level for a similarly situated or sized city, is what I got from the discussions that I saw.
And the same would have held true for the city attorney and the auditor as well, I think.
Yeah, well, I think with the city, I know that with the city attorney and with the auditor, I believe they only received a 4% increase, but I know that council members and I believe council president and I want to say the mayor all
I
got.
think the mayor was also.
The mayor might have, I think he might have been I can't remember if he was 2% or 20% at this point, but.
the mayor was 2%.
Okay, so it was council president and council members that both got 20%.
Or 20%.
And the others were 4%.
4%, that's correct.
Thank you.
You're
That's
welcome.
just a benchmark.
For these, Greg, is there data about who categorizes their folks as full-time or part-time for these cities?
Yes, Commissioner, actually, it is not the next slide, but I think it's in 3 slides. We'll have that information.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see, table 7, page 9. Council President, this is an important note. These are the council presidents, but you'll see fewer cities listed here, and that's because not all municipalities have council presidents. I think someone mentioned just a little while ago that sometimes in some cities, the mayor actually serves as the council president. In some cases, not always.
I think often,
Oh, okay.
what I know.
So those cities are the only ones identified here. So that median salary of $82,749. Next page, page 10, table 8, shows the median number of council members. And that number is 13. You can see that compared with Columbus at 7. Realizing that everyone, I believe, at this table knows that in 2023, there will be an election for 2 additional council members, and then those council members will take their places on January 1st, 2024.
That will probably keep us right about where we are right now, to the extent I'm looking at that 10 line.
And in case you're interested, I happen to remember I also calculated the average. In this case, it's 2 more, it's 15.
I'm wondering if, for instance, in Nashville, Davidson County, apparently they have 40 council members. I'm imagining that's a district representation.
Ward or a district system,
Yeah, ward.
most likely.
So, and I know some of these cities have some at-large members and other members that come from a district. So there are all kinds of combinations. Not a whole lot of cities our size that have elected officials serving at large.
I believe that's accurate. That is also a question that we asked. If it's a district or a ward system, we asked that question, so we do have those responses. There's something else I was going to say about that. I believe Cleveland, when we get their data, I believe they have quite a few council members as well, if I'm remembering correctly.
And they've, in recent decades, they do have a lot, but they're fewer today than there were a decade or 2 ago.
Commissioner, I know I have that slide. Oh, it is there. Okay, I was looking for a graph. Okay. The full-time and part-time question was coming up, and I was looking for a graph. Yeah, I was looking for a graph, and I didn't see it. Okay. Okay, I was a little panicked there. Page 11, Table 9, answers that question about full-time and part-time council members. Full-time, again, of the respondents plus Columbus, 64% of these cities or city-county combinations list their council members as full-time employees. 22% list them as part-time. And then 14%, Columbus and St. Louis, it is actually not defined in the city charter.
For those cities that are full-time, of those cities, are there any that require them not to hold outside jobs and that being the reason for them being full-time?
We also have that information. That is a question that we asked. I noticed that not all respondents answered that question. So that is information that we could present, again, overlay here, add another column. But we do have that.
Yeah, I was just curious if that was the case or not.
Oh, you did give us a slide that was based on population on 3.
Yes, yes, I think
That's
one of the,
population count. That's,
yes, that's correct.
okay.
But what I'll do is I'll add the per capita.
Okay.
So I'll figure in the population in with the salaries. Okay, that is the salary data itself, and traditionally, and I think we've talked about this before, this is kind of the first piece of information from the salary survey. At some point, we need to cut it off. But of course, with the prospect of getting Charlotte and Baltimore this week, and we hope Cleveland and Cincinnati at some point, and of course, anyone else who wants to respond, I'm always willing to take that information. But to that end, there's got to be a point where we say, okay, thank you very much, and then I can present fully all of this information. As it is right now, this is what we have at this point in time. So this is 100% up-to-date information. I've taken a couple of notes here, the per capita, and any other requests that the commission might have to look at the data in a different way, to add additional information from the original questions that we asked the other cities, then I would certainly be happy to produce. What I wanted to move on to, on page 12, there was a request to take a look at the actual CPI, that's the Consumer Price Index. And, yes, Mr. Chairman.
That CPI you're referring to is the one that Bill Lafayette recommended in, when we had, I don't know, our first meeting?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. That entire presentation that he had given to each of the other commissions as well is essentially where we take, that is the expert advice, and that we take that information and essentially the formula that he provides, and that is how we determine what the CPI is every year to determine the COLA, as required by the city charter. What I have here is simply a portion, it's a print-off of the spreadsheet itself that we developed to use to calculate this. Yes, sir?
No, you finish your mind.
Okay, well, what I'm going to focus on here on page 13 is the yellow highlighted area over there at the bottom on the right. On page 13, that is the wording from the city charter: an annual cost of living adjustment which shall not exceed the average increase in the consumer price index or successor thereto during the preceding 4 years. Dr. Lafayette qualified that by recommending that we use all items in Midwest, size A, all urban consumers not seasonally adjusted. The area is Midwest, size Class A. So that is where we get the information. He was even good enough to provide the actual link to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Department of Labor website, which again is what we use every year. The request consisted of, let's take a look at, since 2018, that was the first year of the charter mandated COLA adjustments. And remember that we have to go back the previous 4 years. So it includes the current year plus the last 3 years. These are what the consumer price index increase has been year over year since the first year that we used to calculate that first COLA adjustment in 2018. Slow me down or stop me if I'm being too confusing. And Darlene, please check everything I'm saying.
21 is such an outlier to the rest.
Pardon?
21 is
21.
such an outlier.
Yes,
I have
and-
to ask.
Well, this is what we're reading about and seeing on the news every day or every other day, when even the president last night in the State of the Union address talked about inflation, and this is a result of it. So the end of 2021, this is the annualized, by the way, this is the annualized data. At the end of 2021, what the Bureau of Labor Statistics does is they look back at the previous year. The CPI, and again, Dr. Lafayette can define, he's an economist, I am not. He defined this and talked about it in much more detail than what I ever could. But essentially, the CPI is a market basket of goods and services. So on average, it's about, I'm sorry, I don't remember, 200, that's what all these numbers are on page 12. Right now, December of 2021, it's $250.13. You can see a year before that, it was $242.36. Year before that, it was $239.93, so not a big change there. That is what that percentage change is that we look at.
So just to be clear here, the COLAs that are in place on the elected officials' salaries right now and for next year and the year after are based on the CPI growth of the past 4 years averaged, right?
Yes. That is
So,
correct.
that formula then would be, for our recommendations, would be for the past 4 years' average that would be applied to the coming 4 years, correct?
But it includes that current year. So of course, anything right now that we would look at, we would have to project outwards. I think I'm answering the question. So what the request was, what we looked at is, let's take a look at, even though the elected officials did not receive a COLA increase for 2022, it was just a percentage-based increase. Let's take a look at the last 4 years and project outward, which is what you'll see on page 14. This information assumes no pay increases that the commission might recommend and that city council might approve. This only assumes current salaries plus that 4-year average. That 4-year average, according to my calculations, is 2.23%. You can see, however, the previous years, that 4.54% in 2021 really jumped that up. You can see in previous years, it hasn't even been above 2%. So what I did is I took that 2.23% and essentially added it to the salaries for each elected official beginning next year, and then I wasn't sure when to stop, so I just went out to 2030 because I believe that is the last year that recommendations from this commission will encompass. Just so the commission is able to see, if it were right now and we had to decide, I'm sorry, if you had to decide that that CPI needed to be applied, the current CPI, what would it be? Here's the answer to that question.
So you said they didn't receive a cost of living for 2022 adjustment, as in they haven't received it yet, and so it's not reflected, or they're not going to receive one at all?
They did not and they will not receive a cost of living adjustment.
Okay.
And that's in,
20% increase, right?
the council members did.
council members did,
Yes,
yes.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And that is in the report, and it is in the ordinance as well.
I just couldn't remember, I know there were some that didn't get it, but I thought that council members, it was there every year for them, and so that's why I was a little bit confused.
It's, again, I don't have it here in front of me. My recollection is that the recommendation that was voted on and agreed to was in 2022, there would be no COLA adjustment. It would only be the percentage increase,
You know, you're right, it's, for this year, they just did the.
just
Just
2022.
the increase, okay.
Just
sorry,
2022.
I was like, wait,
But every year leading up to that, we had done the COLA adjustment.
on top of it.
There were no increases. It was just the COLA adjustment.
Okay, so this was the first time that they had the increase, gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay, you're right, because this is only 2015 that it started, so I'm just trying to keep all that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
To understand.
Yes,
Understand it. We would be, if we were to recommend the average that you just did for us, then council from year to year can decide whether or not they take that increase? Is that what I'm?
No, I was asking a question about them getting the increase, but for 2022, there wasn't, the way that the last commission did it, there wasn't an increase because there wasn't a COLA increase because we were like, we're gonna make this big chunk, because the city attorney's office determined that we couldn't do incremental increases every year. It had to be at one time, and so that's why you guys did that big chunk, and then the COLA adjustments would happen every year after that, and those COLA adjustments are
normal.
based on the CPIU.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions of Greg or comments from commissioners or support staff?
My only other comment, Mr. Chairman, is I'm working very hard to get the rest of that data as much as we can. Even if it I don't know, involves going through other means than what I've already attempted, so.
Yeah, we are going to find some other channels to get that information. And we'll get that information to commissioners as soon as we have it. We're hoping that that'll be well before 2 weeks from today.
I'll definitely provide it in the raw data when we receive that, making the charts and the tables. That, of course, takes a little bit longer, but I'll have all of that ready by the next meeting. But we'll definitely have that raw data to provide to the commission.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
You're welcome.
Let's move on to our next item, which Naya's going to give us a presentation on her council member duties survey.
Yes. So I put out a brief survey to council members regarding what their duties and responsibilities were and about how much time they were spending on those. So I'm going to go through the questions first. I was able to get a response from 3 of the council members. My goal is to get them from all 7, but I have 3 as of now. And so the questions that I asked of council members in their offices were, what are some of the tasks or responsibilities associated with being a council member? From their perspective, because those duties can vary from office to office. I asked about how many hours would you say that you spend on average in office for council? About how many hours on average do you spend preparing for council meetings? How many hours of meetings on average would you say that your office has weekly, including department and constituent meetings? Certain times are busier than others for council members, so during peak times like budget or prior to a legislative break, how many hours on average would you say that you spend on your council duties and responsibilities? And the final question was, on average, how many hours a week does your office spend at community meetings and or community events? So those were the questions that I asked of council members to kind of get an understanding. And
Can we have an understanding of who responded? Like, was it council president responding? Is it a new council member?
so we have a mixture. We have a council president did respond. We have a new member that responded, and we have a member that's been here a few years now that's responded. So we have kind of a mix from all of their perspectives. So from one of the new members, when asked what their responsibilities that were associated with being a council member, they said project management, being convener of stakeholders and other constituent services, area commission outreach and public engagement. And once I have all their responses, I'll be able to share this as a collective, but I didn't want to just kind of piecemeal it out, so I just wanted to at least talk about it so you guys had some kind of understanding. And so for the newer council member, they said about how many hours on average in office. They said 30 to 40. Time preparing for council meetings, 10 hours or less. Average hours of meetings, including department constituent meetings, they said 10 to 20 hours. During peak times like budget or prior to a legislative break, 30 to 40 hours. And average at community meetings or community events, 10 to 20 hours. And this is for a newer member who is kind of still getting used to, things as normal. From a more seasoned member, some of their responsibilities and tasks associated included resolving constituent matters and providing constituent support by responding to constituent letters, emails, working with city departments to ensure constituent matters are known and resolved, advocating on behalf of housing insecure residents, immigrant and refugees, and other vulnerable populations. Next, it was meeting with community stakeholders to get a better understanding of their day-to-day, quarterly, and year-round needs, meeting with other city elected officials to execute shared goals and elevate critical thinking work being done internally and externally, hosting a wide range of public hearings, which includes collaborating with city departments and stakeholders, managing their team to complete timeline-based projects, which includes meeting weekly with her team to discuss priorities, constituent cases, and other council-related items, and through strategic leadership, planning, and policy facilitation, empowering their team to lead. Attending national trainings to advance professional development, keeping residents informed about council priorities and services through social media, newsletter publications, and community events, engaging with media by conducting interviews and providing critical information about council or community-led initiatives. And so 10 to 20 hours in the office, 10 to 20 hours in preparation for council meetings, between 20 to 40 hours for department and constituent meetings, or meetings in general. And then during peak season, 20 to 30 hours. and on average at community meetings or community events, 20 to 30. So that was from kind of like a more seasoned council member. And then lastly, with council president, some of the responsibilities: review and approve the annual budget, establish long and short-term objectives and priorities, enter into legal contracts, pass ordinances and resolutions, communicate policies and programs to residents, respond to constituent needs and complaints, represent the community to other levels of government, and regulate land use through zoning laws. And then average in the office, 20 to 30 hours, average preparation for council meetings, 10 to 20 hours, average meetings hours with department constituent meetings considered, 30 to 40 hours, during peak times like budget or prior to a legislative break, upwards of 40 hours, and at community meetings or community events, 10 to 20 hours. So you kind of got a wide range of kind of how many hours they're spending in the office, and their different duties at different levels. Again, this can vary just because there are different levels of engagement that council members are giving to communities and constituents depending on their committee structure, because each council member has different committees that they chair, and some committees are just heavier just by volume of work, or, during certain times. So like you have your heavier committees like safety or health and human services, which are things that require a lot of information and time right now, especially. So that was just kind of an overview. And I wanted to provide that information to you all because I know that that was something you were wondering when you're thinking about, what work are they doing, and how does the salary kind of make sure that it's commensurate with the level of work that's being put in. Do you all have any questions or comments for me?
I do. This is perhaps to both of you. Do we know if in any of the cities that we're looking at, there's a pay structure that if you're chairman of, let's say, zoning, which is probably one of those that is hot, it's always got volume, that chair gets a bump in salary for that period of time that they're chair, and maybe a less active committee, a lesser amount that's over and above what we decide as the median or the average income, what the income will be because you're a council member, whether it's broken down by how your assignments. We sort of do that because the council president is paid more, so it is recognized that there's a level of duty here, but I wondered across the committee structure.
I can answer that question, Commissioner. That is a question that's come up before. We somewhat have that worked into the questions that we're asking, to please note any kind of, what you're referring to is what we call variable pay.
Okay.
So because you do this above and beyond what your peers do in the same classification or same job,
Right.
then we're going to provide you with this amount more, or provide for some kind of a bonus or something like that. The responses that we get is no, it's council members are council members, and they get paid this and only this amount. The president is where you see that variable pay really happen. I've never seen any responses that have significant notes about, because this particular council member is the chairperson of the Public Safety Committee, for example, that, or that, this person spends more time on another committee, or goes out into the city more often to meet with constituents. I've never seen any kind of response that notes something that I think you're suggesting in terms of variable pay.
This is maybe more so a question / comment. But for those cities that have mayors that kind of double as council president, it seems like there's, and I don't know which cities those are specifically, but it seems like there were a lot of mayors and they have city managers that make way less pay. And so if the mayor doubles as council president, it would seem that in some cases, council presidents would make less than members in those cases where they are just largely that ceremonial role, if the mayor is kind of serving a dual role. Would that be an accurate
Possibility, yeah.
conception? Okay.
I have a question. I know these are elected positions, but is there anything in the charter about what the job duties are? Or what people are charged with? If so, can we have that information? Is there a description at all of the type of what their representation means, or what the duties are, or anything like that? Or is that up to each council person to decide? I mean, of course, they have a lot of leeway in how they decide if they're going to engage via social media or, office hours, or however they're going to do that. But is there anything in the charter or anywhere else that gives us an overview of what our community thinks?
Well,
I
the
should be
charter
doing.
does specify the responsibilities of council, as well as the mayor and city auditor.
I think that
Is
would
that
be helpful
right?
as we're listening to what they're saying they do. Like, that would be helpful to just see what the charter actually, or whatever other documentation says.
There's requirements for being a council member. I'll have to look to see what the responsibilities are specifically. I would say that I imagine that those responsibilities would be likely vague, to allow for flexibility, because typically things like that, we are an ever-changing society. And I think Auditor Kilgore really spoke to how Columbus has grown over time. And so responsibilities sometimes grow or shift as cities change. And so I can look and provide information, but I'm sure that it's going to be a lot more vague probably than what they have provided here.
And Commissioner, I have a couple of answers to that question. I was actually just looking at what Naya was referring to in the charter just yesterday for another reason. And it is, it's broad, it generally lists, and Rob, stop me here if I'm missing something, since this is your realm, but. Okay. It lists essentially qualifications, that you need to be a resident of the city and different things like that. From a human resources / civil service standpoint, there is no job description for elected officials at the city of Columbus. So all of us, Rick and Shelley and Naya and Rob and I, each of us have a job description. It's a classification specification is what it's called under the city government class system. There are 657 of those right now. None of them are for elected officials. So from that standpoint, I hope that helps answer your question, but in terms of the charter itself, I see she's actually pulling up the information here.
I'm looking as well. You're 100% correct in terms of the HR side of it and job descriptions. And then, looking in the charter under the council, there's no job description or listing of responsibilities. It just talks about legislative powers and transition and vacancies and qualifications of members, and then a lot of what recently passed with the districting commission and criteria, but there's no enumerated job responsibilities.
Yeah, I was going to ask the chair where he found the information, because I was like, I've never seen it, but I was like, I didn't want to misspeak and say that it wasn't there. But I spent a lot of time in these positions, in these provisions specifically, and I haven't seen any outline of what their work is. They're just more so an outline of the responsibilities for you to have the job, which requires you to be a qualified elector of the city. You have to live in your district, and you have to remain in that district throughout your appointment and your election. And then there are certain things that you can't be like, I think you can't be a lobbyist, a city employee, and things like that at the time of your running. There's a couple other provisions, but I have not seen anything that specifically says council members must do X, Y, Z. So I'm of the understanding that doesn't exist outside of what the requirements are to actually be a council member.
What I was suggesting, I think in the State House, there might be extra pay for committee chairs. Now that it might be flat across the board. I'm pretty sure in Congress that's the case as well, that there's a little there's a benefit anyway, whether it's monetary or not, but I think there is some, and the reason why I really think that this is important, if we are speaking on behalf of public expectation, a person who's too busy to be, really too busy to be chair or not engaged to be chair of public safety or zoning, you know, if left to the discretion of the individual, that, you know, something I think everybody should be thinking about when they decide I'm gonna run to be a member of city council, that there's, you know, there's some baseline of duty, and as you elevate in that position, you know, maybe you do get a little bit more because of that. And, you know, so you ask me, I said, I'm too busy to be that chair, to be chair of that committee. You know, I think that's a reasonable expectation from a public perspective.
Okay. Is there any more to be said about that at this time? If not, I want to have a discussion about how we proceed in regards to a public hearing.
And that was the intro to creating recommendations discussion. So that was still something I wanted to kind of discuss briefly.
Go ahead.
So if you all can look at the screen, and this is all of this information, I know you can't see it, I just want you to be able to see kind of what it looks like, but this information is located on the 2018 Commission's website, which should be, just click on the tab above. But this is kind of what their recommendations look like, and so I wanted you all to at least see this and to start looking at it. As our work will be rapidly concluding on a kind of a quicker scale, I wanted you all to know that this exists, and so that when you're thinking about recommendations, this is kind of how the past commission came out with their recommendations. And so the larger part of, I guess, you all's task is to determine, you know, if you are going to make an increase or not. And then the CPIU and the COLA kind of adjust themselves, so there's not really any work on that end, but it's really coming to the conclusion of whether or not, you know, if there's going to be an increase, or if you all feel like the pay that's being paid is fine with the COLA. And I think, Greg, that was really helpful for you to show kind of what that looks like potentially going forward without any increases. And that's really a discussion that you all will have to continue to have over the next month or so as we start thinking about what the recommendations are going to be. But I just wanted to show what this looks like. And so they did each elected official, and they kind of talked a little bit about what the base pay was, kind of where Columbus fell as respective to other cities. And it also kind of looked at like different like budgets and how the budget and the pay kind of equaled out of how much they decided to pay their elected officials. And then some of the different things that came up in conversation, like, oh, we think this, and this is why, this kind of led us to this conclusion, so things of that nature. And so I wanted to share that information because, you know, we have 2 meetings left after this, and so I wanted to really get your minds kind of in the thought process of like, okay, we have this data, going to spend some time with the data over the next couple of weeks, but I also want to be thinking of, you know, what are we thinking recommendation-wise, so that when we're coming to the meetings, we're ready to kind of have those conversations.
Yeah. Go ahead, Fred.
Either the-
Well, I was going to say that I think we as a commission need to develop a draft and then have a hearing, public hearing on it, and then act. Does that sound right?
Yes.
I just,
Okay,
But
now,
the
I don't,
draft will probably, it will just be, we didn't conclude, we didn't vote until the last minute, the last meeting, as to where we were going to settle. So information was continuing to flow. And that, I think in terms procedurally, I think that's where we need to end up. I just wonder if this requires another meeting, if we have the time to allow for that, that we, get everything in, make our determination, or make our recommendation, and then vote that recommendation at a public meeting.
Yeah, that may be the case. We established these meeting dates kind of tentatively, recognizing that we may have to make adjustments in our schedule to get our job done properly.
And Darlene, I don't, you raised something that just triggered something else. We did look at, kind of percentage of budget the salaries are consuming. We're going to have 2 additional council members, everything else being equal. That could, if there's, is there data that kind of, that the elected
get that.
officials, this is how much,
I can get
what
that data.
percentage of budget?
Yep, I can get it.
Now, I'm unclear what you're talking about. Did Matt Erickson give us that information at our,
He may have,
Last
and I just
meeting?
don't, I just didn't pick it up.
He said he couldn't calculate, I think.
Yeah, I don't know that he was able to, he's not able to calculate it for 2026, but he can calculate it for 2021, 2022,
Yeah.
those are past years. I did have,
Right?
well, no, he looked at, well,
You probably didn't have.
I think it might have just been council. I think the others might have been included, but like when we were talking about, we were talking specifically about council. I don't have that right in front of me.
I mean, there are, other than the salary, there's, the benefit cost too. We could,
He talked about that. He talked about benefits, like as far as insurance and a couple of other things. I just don't have it in front of me to tell you specifically, but I can pull that up as well. I did have a question. I know you mentioned to do a draft, a public hearing, then act. I'm assuming that there could be potentially, for people that come and speak, there could be considerations that are brought that you may want to consider. So is the draft coming first, or do you want the considerations from the community based off of the information without a draft, or do you want them to have something to react to? And I guess that's just a question.
well, if we have a draft first, the public has something to react to. And I tend to believe that that's the way we should do it,
I agree.
okay?
I just wanted to get clarification about that piece.
Do we have the ability to make it like a if-then recommendation, given all the uncertainty that Auditor and Ms. Wild shared with us today? Is there an opportunity to say, look, it's very unpredictable, we don't know what the income tax would be like, and such and such and such and such? Is there a way to, since this committee is only convened so many years, right, every 5 years or something because of the charter, is there a way for us to put something like that in there? Like, if this happens, contingent upon this, they could get an increase, or is it only strictly dollars and cents and percentages?
It's strictly dollars and cents and percentage. I believe the city attorney said last year that when you made if you wanted to give them an increase, it had to be like a one-time increase. It wasn't something you kind of break over years. Is this the same type of thing, Robert, would you say?
I was not involved in those previous discussions. I would have to go back historically and check. I have no reason to doubt the advice that was given previously. But in terms of your if-then scenario, council's going to have to vote on your recommendation. Now, you can provide them with options for how to vote, but nothing like no contingency type of vote. It would, here's option A, here's option B, based on these assumptions, but they're going to have to vote either to keep everything the same or to accept your recommendation, whether it be recommendation A or B or C.
And I kind of think you're right. That's why we had to come up with a number. We couldn't do it over, I think we even looked at, what if we did 15% this year, kind of rolling with the budget.
We ran those numbers
Yeah.
very similar to that last slide
Right.
out of to, I think, 20% pay increases and everything.
The charter, section 15.3 says that we make our recommendations for the purpose of recommending salaries appropriate to the duties and responsibilities of each elective officer of the city. I don't think it suggests any kind of range or options. We make a recommendation, and council can enact that or anything less than that, right?
I would say that's correct, but Robert and I had a brief conversation about this before the meetings. I know that the last couple of meetings have had heavy conversations on full-time, part-time, and what you all were feeling on that. And so, one of the things I discussed with him was just whether or not, like, if you say it is, we are of the opinion that council is blank, whether that's full-time, part-time, whatever that is, then we recommend this salary. But I was like, if the Charter Review Commission came down differently, and then it went to the voters, and the voters decided differently, how that would affect, and we kind of were like, taking the noise out and just being like, focusing on what the commission, based on the duties and responsibilities and the conversations around comparator cities and all of that, what the commission believes is the pay that the council should receive, kind of irrespective of that designation.
Agreed, yes.
I'm a council member. I'm saying, what am I doing over here? Why am I on the right side here? Look at, 64% of the communities.
I wonder, Greg, if those in the left column, those cities that said they're full-time, I wonder if that was something that was in their charter that specified that, or just their response to your question that, oh yeah, they work full-time, right?
I can check into that. We may have that question on there as well.
And would the Charter Commission not be interested in seeing this?
Yeah.
It's possible that they may.
If they're considering that question, I guess, maybe, let me,
I know there's a possibility that question will be asked. Obviously, their work is not going to conclude until July. I think their report is due towards the beginning of July. I don't want to give a specific date just in case, but our work will be concluded hypothetically in April. So whatever they do, like, the work is not necessarily contingent. It's like not hinging on each other. Like, it's
Right.
They're independent commissions doing independent jobs, and their job is to see what things to change in the charter. Ours is to get compensation, and the two of those are technically separate entities, but there are things that could arise where they could, connect, if that makes sense. Robert, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say that, it is completely within your authority and discretion to decide what evidence to collect and gather as you're doing your jobs, and what weight to assign that information and evidence, if you will, what to place more weight on and less weight on, what to discard and what to consider. And so I know that there was some discussion as to whether you were going to reach out to the Charter Commission to have a conversation, and I said that was okay for information gathering purposes. And if the information that you've gathered during that discussion then comes into this group's discussion, that's perfectly fine, and you can use that information as you decide to do when you're making decisions here, but there shouldn't be any kind of joint decision-making, or you shouldn't make decisions worrying about or based on what you think the Charter Commission's going to do. I mean, as Naya said, this commission's going to conclude first. And then, whatever information you've gleaned and gathered from them and used here in your decision-making, that's great, you make your decision. And then when the Charter Review Commission is going to make their decision, they'll see what your recommendations were to council. I don't know whether council will vote on those recommendations before the Charter Commission finishes their work or not, but at least your report will be out. And the Charter Commission can then use that information, your report, for whatever purposes they want to use it for.
Greg, traditionally, I know that this information goes into the MCP ordinance. Do you know typically when is that been typically done right after the conclusion of this work?
I'd have to go back and review or find out or remember when each of the commissions ended, but my recollection is that it was December of both years when it was done.
I know this last commission, for whatever reason, I don't know, because I wasn't here, they did their work way off of time schedule. Like, they were appointed, but they didn't do their work until, like, I want to say they started in late July.
But both commissions were longer, had longer, the meetings were over a longer span of time, yes.
I know that I know that the charter says to do 3 months, and so I am attempting to comply with the charter deadline. But I do know that in past commissions have extended, but if we were able to keep the deadline, I think that would be preferable over extending it.
Well, to the extent that there was inquiry from council itself, you know, who are we? Are we full-time, part-time? This chart is helpful for them, without having to make a decision. Look, take a look here. You know, this should help you to answer your question, and whatever legislative or otherwise that needs to be done, if anything. But I would imagine, I mean, this to me is this is significant. It's to the question, as to the, you know, how I approach an answer to the question. Research has shown us 64% of the people we're surveying consider their council to be full-time. That's all we need to say. I mean, it's and how we factor that into actual numbers, that's of a different nature. But it does go back to this idea that our council members, we should expect, although elected, should expect of them a level of engagement in carrying out their elected duties. You know, this starts from a premise that could be entirely false. As a council member for a very short period of time, I had very little to do with the policy of the committees that I was even chair of. That was all handled by staff. Now, I asked this question even then, is that the expectation of what a council, you know, just show up and, you know, vote on staff's recommendations, or do I participate in the creation of those recommendations? Coming on to council, I thought I would be participating in the creation of those policies, issues, legislation. But it didn't turn out that way. It really was, it was with the staff. So
When you say staff, do you mean your
legislative
council
aides would
members?
come together.
Well, they work at your direction though, right?
Theoretically. But I'm not in the meetings. I mean, you know, were there better ideas that I would have, were there other ideas that I would have latched on to, different than the ones you're recommending? I wouldn't have been at the meetings to know that. You know, I mean, were there conversations between myself and staff? Certainly, but that seemed to be the hours before the council meeting.
Yeah, just for clarification too, section 15-4 of the charter talks about the timing of the report, and it says within 3 months of appointment. So,
Yeah, that was January 10th with the appointment, so the first week in April would be when the report should be going out.
well, what I will say is that there's a sentence at the end of the paragraph that says if the commission fails to timely submit the report to the city clerk, the council may compel a meeting of the commission to prepare and submit the same. So
Yeah.
if this is not the preferred course of action, as you previously indicated, but if you're either struggling or just need more time, then it would have to get on the agenda for council to, I mean, compels is a pretty strong word, but grant, compel, saying, give you an extra month to prepare the report.
So the way that I read that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that if that the commission is doing their work, they're theoretically supposed to be done in 3 months. If they're not done in 3 months and they need more time, and let's say they're languishing, so let's say they take another 3 months, and council's like, come on, we need these things. Council at that point would compel them, basically force the commission to give them a report, and not that the commission has to ask for additional time, but like in the case that the commission fails to and council needs information or wants the information, whatever the case may be, then they would basically require them. I don't even know how they would go about, how the compelling works exactly, but.
I think it's just more forceful language, but I do agree with you, the word compel versus grant, would suggest that, you know, at some point if council feels like it's past the 3-month period of time and the report hasn't been submitted to the clerk, that they would use more forceful language. I don't know whether that would come in the form of a resolution or what, but to say to the commission, you have till X date to submit your report.
Well, this is an odd year, so, you know, we don't even know how the major income revenue into this community, how it's going to be, how it's going to shake out after coming out of a pandemic, and whether or not that was a temporary or permanent shift in employment. I kind of think it was permanent, personally.
Just a reminder, you're looking at recommendations for 2026.
Right,
However-
and that revenue,
Of course, this will figure into it, but
yeah.
just a reminder.
I mean, with
Yeah.
3/4 of our revenue income tax, and what would have been 100% of employees at a desk working inside of Columbus, down to even 90%. That's going to be a dramatic income or revenue impact.
Also taking into account the inflation of the CPIU right now at about 4.5%, when it's historically been around 1.5% for the last several years. I think that was something that Greg pointed out, so kind of looking at, if you're going to look at that, looking at income tax as well as considering the inflation of the CPIU, because I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is like, we don't know,
Well, and
or you all don't know, rather.
Well, of course, we don't know. That's future information. But one of the most important things there that I think the Charter Commission did there is they realized that. And that if we want to call 2021 an anomaly, if we want to call what we all think is probably going to still happen in 2022, maybe not as high, an anomaly, 23 and 24 may be whatever back to normal is. So that's why there's an average of 4 years instead of simply the previous year
Maybe.
for that.
You know, there's a war. There's
True,
pandemic,
true,
there's-
true.
So it's like,
Absolutely.
I don't know that we'll feel any more prepared in 3 months than we will today.
Right.
We'll just have new data points, but at the end of the day, I think we're still going to be like,
Yeah, it's,
Also taking into account that there'll be 2 additional council members, so you're looking at the additional council members, so that will result likely in a need for an increased budget to accommodate those 2 council members, plus their 2 staff persons per council member. So that's a total of six new people, and that's not considering, and I think this was talked about a lot in Director Aaronson's presentation, the effect that will have on support staff, as well as just permanent improvements to council chambers, the building itself, and creating room and space for these additional folks. So those are all things in addition to income tax and CPIU. I guess I'll call it inflation for now, but CPIU, inflation, all of those things are things to consider when you're thinking about, you know, what sort of pay that you're thinking.
And to the chair, I think another thought you just caused me to think about. And for debate of all of, you know, for general debate, was increasing council a voter saying, yes, we do anticipate and expect a, you know, if 10% of the budget has gone to elected officials, we just added 2 more, so yeah, it's going to be a bigger percentage. Or are we going to try to stay within the percentage, given that the community's growing? So we'll capture that in the growth of our projected revenue increases over the years. I kind of think when the public says, give me 2 more council members and all that goes with it that you just described, they're saying we want a bigger portion of our budget going there. I want a bigger portion of my budget going to council. I also expect more from council now. I have more council members, things that weren't in my district that I didn't think were being covered. Now I have somebody who should be handling those issues. I mean, it's just not give me 2 more council members. It was, there was some reasoning behind the charter amendment.
I also want to note that there hasn't been a change in council structure in terms of the committee structure. So like, it will be more people, but the work, there hasn't been a discussion about whether the work will change, if that makes sense. So right now, council has a number of committees that govern the different areas and sectors of council's work, but there hasn't been any decision that I am aware of that talks about whether there'll be, I guess, new things that they'll tackle, so like a new committee creation based off of these new additional members, or if there will be fewer council members assigned to the committee because there's more of them now, or, I don't, or more council members assigned to a committee per se because there's more of them now, but the structure, committee structure, which is all things that you all necessarily don't need to worry about, but just kind of wanted to point out that there hasn't been any discussion about the structure changing despite the number of council members increasing. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's something to be thought, that needs to be thought through, but that isn't, we can only project out. I mean, it's, I would assume, so back with 7, every council member was chair of something, right?
Yeah.
The new council member was chair of Parks and Recreation, which was perceived to be, although it's a bigger department than I think we give credit to, what it's called, I think, is why we kind of denigrate it, but it's a really important part of the quality of life of our community. But that's where all the first termers ended up with that assignment, right? And the more experience would be dealing with the zoning issues or the police fire issues, which are always ongoing and continuous and daily almost engagement. So, yes, there's going to have to be some thought about this. Anyway, with those additional thoughts are additional assignments, which means additional work and expectation and all that goes with it. So what's the right salary for that job?
The other thing that has to be considered, council members, if there are 9 instead of 7, that means that there are more council members to interact with and meet with amongst themselves. That's just the way it is.
And again, this was many years ago, but all of that happened in the hours before the council meeting. That's when council got together if I was a council member and I wasn't prepared to have a piece of legislation move forward, or looking for dynamics. If we pass this, we need to pass that. If you're not ready, then this can't be ready. I mean, that's the kind of discussions we may have. But I was talking through what I was being told by my aide. You should, you may not be ready for this one to go because, and so if that's the level we're talking about of council engagement, that's a different salary structure to me. Then, you need to understand this because you got to report out to your constituents in your district or whatever, why you did this, why do you voted that way.
So for sake of moving that conversation forward and hopes of being able to have these further conversations, I'm just going to lay on the table what I'm thinking at this point, and obviously I would like to see the additional information and may change that. But I don't really see any reason, I guess, at this point to believe that mayor, auditor, city attorney is totally out of whack of where it should be, right? And so I would be open to considering an increase and CPI. In my mind, that's not a huge increase, but I would be open to a small increase and, on top of cost of living adjustments and those kinds of things. And then for council, I would like to see my council member personally become full-time, right? And actually take that as a full-time position. But at the pay rate it's at right now, I don't think that that's realistic. I also, worry if we bump it up too much, are people still gonna just kind of do what they're doing? It doesn't necessarily change anything. We're not gonna change anything. But I would be open to having that consideration, or having that conversation. And I think that's the part of the conversation that's gonna be the most difficult for our commission, based on the conversations that we've been having day after day. But I think we have to put the ball in the court now and start thinking and having these conversations openly about what do we actually want to do. And I think that council piece is going to be the most difficult for this commission. So that's what I think, and I would be interested in hearing what other folks think as well.
I tend to agree with you, although I still want to see numbers from Cincinnati and Cleveland in particular. But I'm not opposed to your thoughts there.
I think you're pointing out some of the weakness in this, what created this body. We're not going to be able to dictate the conduct of a council member. We might, this goes to maybe the questions you asked. If this, then that, we could maybe report. We reach these conclusions based on a series of factors, right? That we do believe that the council members should be looking at their positions as full-time, that the council president is responsible to monitor and make sure that they are that as would any public chair, I guess, you're putting the right people in the right places. Person doesn't have a lot of time, don't assign it to something where the council member is going to have a lot of engagement. Police and fire, seems to me there's always collective bargaining going on. Always, so, of some sort. So that's, I know that staff has the most experience, but you were elected. It's your vote that is being monitored or valued by the general public. You need to know what these decisions are and be prepared to defend them.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty is, we can have these conversations for the rest of our lives, really, right? With the frustrations of the system and what we can and can't do. But we still have to come up with a number and base it and.
But can we add that? Can we say we came to this conclusion on these numbers? I
Oh, I
guess
think
I'm
in the
asking.
report, yeah.
Yeah, within
definitely.
the report.
Yeah.
These are our assumptions, that, the public is anticipating, full engagement, without,
And that
not
is
full.
what the 2018 report specifies.
Okay,
The
okay, we did
2018
have these assumptions.
information
Okay.
has that
Yep.
information
Okay,
in there.
great.
Yes.
And say, we looked at this and looked at that, and that kind of led us to this, or, our understanding of this is that blank, and so that led us to the conclusion of this. To Commissioner Ingles' point, no matter what this determination that you make, whether you decide, okay, we think they're full-time, we want to bump up to full-time, there isn't a prohibition on them having outside work, so they can be full-time here and full-time elsewhere. So I just want to kind of make sure that that's clear, that even if you bump them up to full-time, they are not prohibited from having outside work based on that determination that you as a commission makes. And so,
The only thing I think, I'm sorry to cut you off.
oh, no, go ahead.
The only thing I think is that if we set, one consideration, and I'm not necessarily advocating for this, but if we set a full-time salary in the hopes that that would attract somebody who wants that position full-time, then we've at least created the opportunity where that is a really, comfortable living wage for the amount of work that they're doing if they choose to do it full-time. We can't control the other outside factors, and I think that's where a lot of our frustration lies. At least I can speak for myself, but,
That's where we'll talk about the ethics of it.
yeah.
Right, your responsibilities have to, if you want to do that, that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
But, if you've taken a position where you're going to have to recuse yourself, on various topics, you're not, we want your council to be thinking about these
Yeah.
as they make decisions, especially if we believe we have created a salary structure that reflects that. And I think what you initially said was, I'm not thinking that where we are today is setting a salary with those kinds of thoughts in mind. It's almost encouraging outside. It almost encourages people to step outside of these responsibilities. which then gets back to, well, what does the public expect? The public was,
I'm going to say, just toward, in the spirit of kind of legally keeping within the timeframe, articulated in the charter, for consideration would be, maybe over the next month, meeting weekly, or even more than once a week if necessary, and that perhaps the first step might be for you to create the framework draft and let the commission maybe come to some sort of consensus on just the language itself in the draft. And then maybe at another meeting, that's when the numbers actually get plugged into the draft, and then there's a follow-up discussion to gain consensus on the numbers. So that's just.
excellent idea.
That sounds like a good way to proceed.
Just trying to keep within that time frame, because I know it's kind of closing quickly.
Can you do that, Naya?
Yeah, I'd like that.
I can create a framework draft. I guess my thought around the framework draft is what should be included, because, I mean, what are you going to look at? Like, I mean, because part of that framework is the question, the kind of thoughts that you all are thinking about as it goes into that discussion. But as far as like the actual language, it's pretty, like, it's boilerplate. So that's why I was like, I don't know how helpful that would be. Or are you wanting me to kind of look at what you have said and kind of try to like put that into a framework based on my knowledge of the meeting?
Debate, it's for us to debate more so than, it doesn't necessarily look like that in the end, but it gives us a tool to.
I don't know whether what's in the previous report is consistent with the themes that have been discussed thus far, but, maybe just using the version from last time as the starting point, have an understanding that every commissioner is going to review it and have edits ready for the next meeting, which potentially could be next week, and then you're there with your laptop making edits as they're talking and coming to consensus by vote.
Because the 2018 report is, I believe it's online, so they already have access to that. So, I mean, I can just kind of copy paste and make a Word version, but I would encourage you all to be looking at what's there and like what are the things that you want to be different than what is there currently. Because I feel like if I'm just going to be copying and pasting, the framework is not that helpful for you all if it's just a copy and paste. I can create it so that we can edit it in real time when we're at our next meeting, whenever that is. But I would encourage you all to take a look at it and see if, like, okay, we agree with the kind of the thought process here, and so we want to keep that language in, or we want to add some things. And I could kind of, I think I could do a good job at summarizing what at least I feel like you all are thinking and saying to present to you, and you can tell me like we never said that, or like this is exactly what we're thinking. And if that's helpful, I can do that too.
That's fine. I think it's easier when you see the draft and then you can make edits to a draft instead of just like, oh, one day we're gonna write this draft,
Okay. Consensus on what the
Yeah.
draft, just not the numbers part, but the other part of the draft looks like by the end of the next meeting, you're probably 70% there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've already started looking at that.
Okay, so now let's do that.
Okay.
We'll have our next meeting 2 weeks from today, recognizing that subsequent meetings may be more,
I'm gonna suggest you
I would
think
say,
about meeting
I
next
was gonna say next week because I was gonna.
I'm out of town.
Oh, okay, well, then there may need to be multiple meetings in 1 week because there's only gonna.
Possibly.
Because there's,
We'll have to wait and see.
well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if we meet on the 16th, it would be the 16th, the 23rd, and the 30th if we add those things, but that's still only that's only adding one additional meeting. And so if you're thinking that you need more than one additional meeting, and since you're out next week and you can't do anything next week, where else would you like to pencil in a meeting, or do you think that 3 meetings should be?
I don't think we can decide that. We have to, go ahead. No, please, Fred.
It's my recollection, so that's why it's dangerous. But I believe the place where you're taking us now, where we're having a document to respond to or react to on these issues, that's going to take some time. But thereafter, these meetings are going to get shorter.
Yes.
I mean, we're not going to have to go over that. How much time will it take for us to average out what's the dollar amount to put in, or what's the CPI? That, we've heard, the meetings that we've had, we've heard a lot of, the important data. So yes, we may need these meetings, and they all have to be published, don't they?
Yes.
And how much, give me an idea of how much time.
So I just need to be able to tell them semi in advance because there's other commissions and meetings and public hearings that are happening. And so I need to make sure that our CTV team is available to film it because they're also responsible for the mayor's office and any other, they're pretty much responsible for the city when it comes to recording and publicizing our meetings that are public, which is pretty much any commission is public, and several other things are public. And so I just am looking at, from a time perspective, do we want to, because I can take things away, but it's easier for me to kind of say, let's put this and this on your calendar. That way, it's already prepared, and if I need to cancel it, I can cancel it, but it's easier to cancel than it is to schedule.
Could we tentatively add the 23rd, and then at the 10 a.m. slot? And then could we also pencil in an evening meeting somewhere, and that might give us a little more flexibility on time? I know with my schedule, I'm like, oh crap, I gotta,
Well,
go.
possibly we want to have the public hearing in the evening
Yeah.
to,
Yeah, the public hearing, for
So
sure.
an evening, what do we want? The 24th, Thursday, the 24th in the evening?
that's fine with me.
If it's available,
I can look if it's available.
okay. And if
Okay.
it's not, we could figure that out at the next meeting or whatever.
The public meeting, you probably had 2 people, maybe.
I would just say no Mondays,
I mean, it wasn't-
no Fridays. Fridays just don't
Yeah.
get engagement, and Mondays is a council meeting, so.
That'd be fun, yeah, the 24th, so we'll pencil in, 5, 6, I don't know. 6, okay.
I feel like a lot of public hearings start at 5:30 versus 6, but
Split the difference. 5:30.
That's fine, yeah. Whatever works for the team.
And no, I just wanted to comment on something another point you made, that you'll try to take in what you think you heard from us. That is extremely important, because if you interpreted something I said, for instance, however you heard it, and I said, oh, I didn't mean that. That's a good check on me or on any of us who have articulated ideas or thoughts.
Okay.
So it's kind of, I used to say to my secretaries, administrative staff, read this letter and make sure that the person who's going to be reading this is understanding if you don't understand it, then I have to assume the person I'm sending to isn't going to understand it either. So it is extremely helpful to all of us to know what you think you heard.
And so, just so I'm clear on what Commissioner Ingles said, you think you would be comfortable with a small increase for city auditor, city attorney, mayor, and then you think that the larger increases would be in the council president and council,
Yes.
Okay.
Whatever those numbers are, I don't know that I can answer right now, but
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
that's the
yeah.
general concept.
right,
yeah.
and that's,
Yep.
I can do more projections.
Yes.
and that,
Yes, the plug-in numbers. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Just real quick, something, food for thought or some things to consider, and I haven't looked at the charts and did the comparisons, but, in response to Commissioner Ingles, the mayor, he's, obviously the mayor of the 14th largest city in this country, right? And from the numbers, it appears, he makes on an average about $4,000 more than the city attorney and the city auditor. Okay, I'm not saying that those people don't deserve the salary that they're getting or that they don't deserve an increase. My only point is I would ask you to consider, the duties and responsibilities that the mayor has, and the fact that he, unlike the other 2 positions and city council, is not allowed to hold a secondary, job. This is his job. So, and I believe everybody else, that we're considering is allowed to hold a secondary job, and most of them do, with the exception of council president, from my understanding. And so, I'm sorry.
the auditor and the city attorney cannot have additional jobs, so the only people that can have outside jobs is our council, essentially. The other other two positions plus the mayor's position, all those positions they're restricted from having outside employment.
And I really hate to contradict anyone, especially right after you've just said it. I looked this up specifically, and it was just actually yesterday. What it says, the charter, is that it says that the other elected officials who are not the mayor cannot hold another public office. But it says nothing about other employment. Under the mayor, it specifically says he or she cannot hold other public employment, public office, but also it has the word employment in there. So that is the difference. And I say this because it was just about 24 hours ago, and I had all 5 of them kind of stacked up there against each other where I could compare each of them, and what Rick was saying before is accurate.
And I know
And
the city attorney, my boss,
I'm
does
sorry.
referees basketball games for the high school association. I'm sure he gets paid for that.
College.
I
Or college, yeah.
Yes, sir.
I don't know where I read it, but it was like, I guess the interpretation is that they weren't able to have jobs, and most times they don't have like other significant full-time employment. But that's good, that's good, that's good to know, though, that
Thank
they.
you for that. That is helpful context.
Yeah.
I'm just saying something to consider. So I think that there should be more room between those two, given the heavy lift, and where he is.
Maybe that's in the percentage of increase, that's the conversation for.
Yeah. So I wouldn't just want to go with CPI, I want to create a little bit more distance than that, given the circumstances.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I think we should conclude this meeting. And Greg, let's get to work on trying to get these numbers. I know you've worked real hard at it, but let's you and I talk about that.
And I'll call them again today, Mr. Chairman. They'll be tired of hearing from me.
Yes,
Can
Sarah.
I just
Probably earlier.
confirm that we have a meeting scheduled for the 16th, the 23rd, and the 30th at 10 a.m. And then on the 24th, we are tentatively scheduling the meeting for 5:30, but that's most likely to be the public meeting, so.
Say that again, please, Sarah.
So it's basically Wednesday, the 16th, 23rd, and 30th of March. And those are all at 10 a.m. And then the 24th is the 5:30 p.m. meeting.
Just,
Well, we already have scheduling for the 16th and the 30th.
We
The
need to plug
23rd
in the
The
23rd.
23rd, I need to confirm that we can schedule. That one hasn't been, that's not a confirmed meeting. I just need to confirm space and availability and where it's going to be, because I don't know what other meetings are taking place. So we can have a meeting that day. I just don't know where it's going to be at.
Yeah, that's fine.
okay,
Just
so.
the 23rd and the 24th, so both
So
of
the
those.
new additions would be 10 o'clock or some other hour, but presumably 10 o'clock on Wednesday, the 23rd, and a hearing the following day
Yeah, following
in the evening. Okay?
Are you all sure that you'll be ready to have a hearing that next day, or?
If we're not, we could bump it, because we have the 16th meeting, and we'll have a sense of how much debate we have on the thing that you have for us, so.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can, 2 weeks from today, we can see where we stand and adjust our schedule as is necessary,
If not,
considering the meeting constraints and our requirements to announce the public meeting.
Yeah, and I was saying, it has to go into the public bulletin a week before, and we have to have a decent amount of marketing of the meeting so that the public can
Yeah.
be engaged, and so that's kind of why that's why it's kind of important for us to kind of like, okay, this is what we think what we can do, because we have to kind of plan in advance to have that public notice and stuff go out.
Okay?
I think once we start working off a draft, we'll be much quicker.
Okay. Well, I'll start working on that over the next couple of weeks, and have something prepared for our meeting on the 16th.
Okay?
Are there any?
Is there anything else to come before us? Yes, sir, Rob?
Just briefly, I'm under the assumption that at the city council meeting this coming Monday, they're going to repeal the mask ordinance, which means the next meeting, there won't be a requirement to wear masks. There's also House Bill 51 that the governor signed, which allows for virtual meetings. So that's, again, within your discretion whether to have virtual meetings. I'm guessing you're going to go in the direction of meeting in person because it's a smaller group. But know that at the next meeting, if the ordinance gets repealed, there won't be a requirement to wear a mask at these meetings, and that may change everyone's comfort level in terms of whether you want to hold the meetings virtually or not, or create a space there's a little more social distancing and things like that. So I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention.
And we hadn't considered virtual, so that's another opening. But the problem there is it still has to be recorded, so, I guess there must be a means to do that too, right?
I
Virtual meetings?
emailed Naya with all of the nuts and bolts of House Bill 51 and what would be incorporated if you decided a virtual meeting. So it's similar to what was in effect last year.
Yeah, and I did some virtual meetings with the District King Commission. However, the commissioners were in person, but the public, we expressed to the public and advised that they attend virtually, partially because it was easier, because with WebEx and trying to kind of move all of that around, it can get kind of difficult in terms of connection. So I think my preference would be for us to continue meeting in person, and if people are not comfortable not wearing a mask, I'm sure that we could all agree to wear our masks despite what the city decides to do as it relates to a mask ordinance. But that is.
I really want to meet in person, is my preference. Can I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you.